The Austin investor who is at the center of allegations against Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton was indicted today on federal charges. Nate Paul is charged with 8 counts of making false statements in connection to alleged financial crimes. Let's bring in Austin American statesman and KHOU reporter Tony Plohetsky, who was in the courtroom this morning. And Tony, did Paul have anything to say?
He did not. In fact, he said essentially nothing and allowed his attorneys to speak for him during about a 20 to 25-minute hearing in U.S. District Court this morning. This was an initial appearance during which the judge went over all of the charges against Nate Paul and also stipulated requirements for his release on bond, including, Cheryl, for example, that he had to surrender his passport and he has to surrender any firearm that he may possess. Typical things that a defendant in federal court often has to do.
Now, Tony, we know that Ken Paxton's name has been brought up in connection to these allegations a lot recently. Was his name brought up in court today or in any of the documents?
That was one of the big questions going into the proceeding today. And once we were able to look at what is now a 23-page indictment against Nate Paul, and that is whether or not it would anyway speak to his relationship to Ken Paxton. Keep in mind that Nate Paul is at the center of the scandal around Ken Paxton, and whistleblowers alleged and a House investigating committee here in the Texas Capitol also contends that Ken Paxton was taking a number of steps to aid Nate Paul in a number of different arenas and legal quandaries that he was in. But one of them was, in fact, this ongoing federal investigation targeting Nate Paul.
Now, Tony, what could this mean, if anything, for Paxton's impeachment trial that's coming up in the Senate?
That's an open question as we sit here this afternoon. A big question is whether or not the Texas Senate, which again will determine whether or not Ken Paxton is fully impeached and permanently removed from office or not. But the question is whether or not they may somehow try to bring Nate Paul in as a witness in that upcoming impeachment proceeding and what Nate Paul may say about his relationship with Ken Paxton.
So what's next in Paul's case, as was discussed today in court?
Well, again, he will be in federal court next week to have a formal arraignment. But a big question, too, that attorneys who are closely watching this case also have is the degree to which Nate Paul may try to strike some sort of deal now that there are charges in place. In other words, whether or not he may be willing or have information concerning Ken Paxton that could be fruitful in an ongoing federal investigation at the U.S. Department of Justice into Ken Paxton's conduct.
All right. Thank you so much, Tony Plohetsky, answering our questions today from Austin at Federal Court. Appreciate it.